Well, of course, all the buzz surrounding LSU's Pro Day, surrounded by Derek Stingley Jr., rightfully so. But that's the biggest buzz in Baton Rouge, and just how big is his buzz around the country? Where can we expect Derek Stingley to go on draft day? Plus, there are plenty of other NFLSU hopefuls out there at Pro Day. So what other players really stood out, and who can we potentially see other than Derek Stingley Jr. from this class playing on Sundays? And speaking of playing in the pros, there are plenty of LSU Tigers in a different professional sport that just hit off yesterday. We'll get into all of that and more on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. I'm an LSU alum. I am a diehard LSU fan. I've been covering LSU football for the past 4 or 5 years. That's pretty crazy to say. But I am now a sports talk radio host here in Nashville, Tennessee for ESPN 1025 The Game. I cover all things college football, SEC, the local sports here, the Vols, and the Commodores, also covering all things NFL, NHL, you name it, we talk about it, sports in general. So make sure to follow me on Twitter. I'll post all of my sports takes, my LSU takes, podcast updates. Follow me at Caroline Fenton 1. And also, you can listen to us on any of your preferred podcast platforms, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. If you're on the go, if you're in the car, you can listen there, but you can also watch the podcast. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page, Locked On LSU. And as soon as you subscribe, you'll get notified whenever these podcasts drop, so you don't have to miss a second of LSU content. But like I said, Derek Stingley Jr., the talk of Baton Rouge on LSU's Pro Day. I mean, slated to be one of the best corners in this draft, if not the best corner in this year's draft. This was Ryan Clark on NFL Live earlier this week talking about just how good Derek Stingley is.
And the atmosphere was all about Stingley Jr. You knew so many people, so many defensive coaches, head coaches were there to see if he still had the fight, to see if he still had the skill. Did the explosiveness in person match what they saw on tape his freshman year? And he checked all of those boxes. And honestly, Laura, what I saw from Derek Stingley Jr. is the same thing I've been seeing from him since he was 15. He is phenomenally talented. He's a guy who can step right on the field. And when we're talking about skill for skill, measurable for measurable, be with anybody who's playing in the NFL right now. This kid has Jalen Ramsey, Stephon Gilmore type potential, but it's about seeing it right out of the gate. Derek Stingley was born to do this. I think everybody is wondering which Derek Stingley you'll get, and today he showed them at least the guy you get has every bit of the measurables that you need to be successful.
I mean, you heard him. Derek Stingley Jr. has everything an NFL team would need to be successful. Jalen Ramsey, Stephon Gilmore, two of the best corners in the league is who he's compared to. So why is it not a slam dunk that Derek Stingley Jr. is, going in the top 10? And that's a question that I asked myself. Could Derek Stingley Jr. still be the first corner taken in this draft? Now, initially slated to be a top 10 pick, to be the first corner taken, after that 2019 season, people were already talking about Derek Stingley in the NFL. Rightfully so. Derek Stingley put up, insane numbers, some of the best numbers in college football as a true freshman. But with that Linsfranc injury in his foot and the setbacks that he suffered this past season, the fact that he's only played 10 games in the past 2 seasons, the fact that from 2020 to 2021, there was some decline there, and the fact that they haven't seen production, NFL caliber production from Derek Stingley since 2019 is the cause of the slip. But I wonder, the injury, we established that there have been several NFL players who have suffered that exact same injury, and almost all of them return with no significant statistical decline. But I look at Sauce Gardner, Cincinnati corner. He has been kind of elevated throughout this entire pre-draft process. his combine has kind of elevated him up into a lot of NFL mock drafts. So I think that if Derek Stingley is not the first corner taken off the board, Sauce Gardner will be. But I'm here to make my campaign as to why I do think that Derek Stingley will be the first cornerback taken off the board and what caveats could be there be to that. So first and foremost, I'll compare both Sauce Gardner and also Derek Stingley's best seasons in college. Of course, 2019 Derek Stingley, 2021 Sauce Gardner. Of course, a college football playoff caliber season for the Cincinnati Bearcats. I look at 2019 Derek Stingley. 38 total tackles, 31 of them solo. Sauce Gardner, on the other hand, 40 total tackles, 28 solo. 6 interceptions for Derek Stingley in 2019, only 3 for Sauce Gardner, 15 passes deflected for Derek Stingley Jr. in 2019, as opposed to Sauce Gardner in 2021 with 4 passes deflected. Now, total tackles, you're kind of looking around the same lines there. 2 more for Sauce Gardner total in the 2021 season. But when you look at interceptions and passes deflected, it wasn't even close. Derek Stingley Jr. absolutely had a bigger 2019 than Sauce Gardner had 2021. And I compare their draft profiles. Derek Stingley, his NFL comparison was Stephon Gilmore, of course, one of the best corners in the league. Sauce Gardner, on the other hand, Richard Sherman, who has been riddled with injury over the past couple of years, but in his prime, Richard Sherman was the best cornerback in the league. So you're both looking at 2 NFL caliber, established, really solid corners. And I also look at the cons, because I compare the 2019 Derek Stingley and the 2021 Sauce Gardner, and while Derek Stingley, in my opinion, his stats are more impressive, that was in 2019. It's 2022. Derek Stingley's been dealing with injury. He said at the Pro Day that only 2 days prior to Pro Day did he feel 100%. And Derek Stingley Jr.'s and his NFL draft profile, his only cons have everything to do with the injury. The cons: lack of consistency over the past 2 years because of injury. Hasn't played a full season since 2019 due to injury. Concern for a potential setback after not playing consistently for 2 years due to injury. And all of his pros seem like such an obvious choice. The prototype for a cornerback, an NFL cornerback. This is a quote from his NFL draft profile. Everything a team could want in a cornerback. And the only thing that's really setting him back and putting him below Sauce Gardner or even putting him up below a top 10 pick is that injury. And I look at Sauce Gardner, his cons are his size. He's a tall guy. He's got long arms. He's got sticky hands. But he's not an overly big guy. He's not incredibly powerful. He's a penalty machine. We saw that in 2021. Gets a lot of holding calls. Sloppy at times. So I look at Sauce Gardner, and although some of those things can absolutely be refined, the penalties, the sloppy at times, you can't control his size. But whenever, and that's absolutely going to be a disadvantage for Sauce Gardner because he's going to have matchups with guys like Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp and DeAndre Hopkins, these big, long, strong, tall wide receivers. And that's absolutely a disadvantage for Sauce Gardner. So if I'm an NFL general manager, if I look at it on paper, Derek Stingley seems like the obvious choice. But injury, I have to be completely honest, is my biggest no-no in the NFL draft. I compare it to, for example, the Tennessee Titans, a team that I cover on a day-to-day basis. This past draft in 2020, they selected a cornerback out of Virginia Tech by the name of Caleb Farley. And Caleb Farley was in and out of the lineup. He had spinal surgery. He's been dealing with back issues. And I said, don't draft that guy. Do not draft that guy. Why would you would sacrifice your first round pick for a guy that may not even be 100%. So it's hard for me to be able to say that and then have my, own personal connection to Derek Stingley and say, oh, he deserves to be the first overall corner taken. But I look at the difference in injury. Linsfranc injury, albeit incredibly finicky and kind of fluky, it's not a very common injury. It's not like your concussion or your ACL tear that you see on a day-to-day basis in the NFL. But there have been several players come back from that. And I compare it to the injury of Caleb Farley from the Tennessee Titans, for example, who has played in maybe 2 games and was injured again, tore his ACL midway through the season. That was a spinal injury. And I think this is something that, albeit Derek Stingley hasn't been able to really prove what he can do in the past 2 seasons, you're going to have a little bit of faith and a lot of hope And I know there's a lot of general managers out there that don't want to take that gamble, but the stats tell a story themselves. And Derek Stingley Jr. is the best cornerback in this draft. Now, coming up next, what other NFLSU hopefuls could we see playing on Sundays next year? Whose draft stock has been rising, who's been falling? We'll get into that coming up next. But next, I want to tell you about Built Bar. So this is the time of year my New Year's resolutions no longer seem very fun. But this year, it's so easy to stick to my New Year's resolution to eat right, because with Built Bar, they make it so easy because I actually enjoy eating them. And also, if you haven't tried them yet, try the Puffs. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, and they're not just a protein bar. They taste like a candy bar. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate, as are all Built Bars. Plus, they're low calorie, they're high protein, they've got only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, only 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. But compare that to a candy bar, for example. A typical candy bar can have 200 to 300 calories, has a ton of sugar, has a ton of carbs. They're not good for you. But with Built Bar, you get the best of both worlds. They taste good and they're good for you. Plus, they're always coming out with new flavors. They've got mint brownie, they've got coconut almond, and all new for this month is white chocolate cookies and cream. They're delicious and new flavors are coming out all the time. So check out their website to see what flavors are on the horizon. All about taste at Built Bar. They make it taste delicious first, then they pack in all the good stuff and they figure out how to make it healthy, and they pull it off every single time. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, I mentioned Derek Stingley, and if you ask someone about, who's the best draft prospect coming out of LSU, it's undoubtedly anyone who knows anything about football would say, hands down, Derek Stingley Jr. But this year, as opposed to, you have your stars that come out every year. So that's obviously Derek Stingley. But there are plenty of guys in this draft class from LSU that we could see playing on Sundays. Maybe not be draft guys. Maybe their draft stock is rising, who is falling. But draft stock that is rising was someone that I really did not expect to hear. Kind of a dark horse whose name we heard a lot early in 2022, but not a name that I really expected to be associated with the draft. So whose draft stock is rising? And that is Trey Kirkland. Now, earlier on CBS Sports, Dennis Dodd was at LSU for LSU's Pro Day, and he mentioned just how impressive Trey Kirkland was. He wide receiver, quarterback for LSU against Kansas State in the Texas Bowl, ran routes with the corners. So, really, he can do everything. But this is what Dennis Dodd had to say about his experience with Trey Kirkland at LSU's Pro Day earlier this week.
Kirkland, I'm not saying he's going to get drafted. He may be a free agent guy, but he was so pleasant to talk to. This guy was the quarterback in the bowl game when they had no quarterbacks available or healthy, and he threw for 138 yards. He worked out as a receiver. He worked out as a defensive back. He tried playing quarterback. He played quarterback in high school. And he's a guy I think somebody's going to get a lot of value with because he can get a lot done. They asked him today, hey, do you want to play defensive back? And he said, yeah, I'll play defensive back.
Hey, I know you played quarterback in the bowl game after you spent your entire career at LSU playing wide receiver, and you had to pull out all of your quarterbacking skills from high school. But could you also play corner? Yeah, for sure. I'll play corner. I think that's so incredibly cool. It's cool from Trey Kirkland because, like Dennis Dodd said, I don't think he's going to be drafted. You can maybe see him being a UDFA, maybe a late round guy, a 6th or 7th round guy if someone sees potential as a kind of a utility player out of Trey Kirkland. A master of none, but a jack of all trades. And that's exactly what Trey Kirkland was. But just his numbers from LSU Pro Day, he had a 43 vertical. And if he would have done that at the NFL Combine, with some of the best talent in the country, that would have been the highest vertical jump. Tariq Wooden, a corner out of UTSA, and Channing Tindall, a linebacker out of Georgia, were both tied for 42. So Trey Kirkland would have had the highest vertical at the NFL Combine, which is pretty cool. Also had an 11.5 broad jump and a 4.52 40. So he doesn't have that elite wide receiver speed that really is kind of necessary to be a starting wide receiver in this league. So I don't see him being, a high pick. I don't see many teams willing to dish out draft stock for John Trey Kirkland. But like I said, potentially a UDFA, could get on an NFL roster, and having an attitude like that, willing to play quarterback, wide receiver, cornerback, whatever you need him for, he's willing to do. The guy just loves football. And I think that's an intangible that a lot of NFL teams are looking for. It's just guys who love ball. So John Trey Kirkland's draft stock, in my opinion, or at least NFL stock, has risen after LSU's pro day and after he's been able to not just show off what he can do physically, but also, just communicate with people. And Dennis Dodd mentioned in an extended version of that clip that, he had the best conversation with John Trey Kirkland. So, of course, you're not going to draft a best friend, but always those intangibles that NFL coaches are looking for. Damon Clark is another NFLSU candidate coming out this year. Damon Clark is expected to be, your average linebacker in the league, which is not a knock on Damon Clark by any means, but there are some fundamental issues with Damon Clark, maybe some size concerns there. I saw Damon Clark being like a 3rd or 4th round pick, someone that could come in immediately and kind of fill that backup role, fill a special teams role, and eventually find his way into being a starting solid linebacker in the league. I don't see him being any sort of disruptor in the NFL, in my opinion, but a certified starting linebacker in the league, a guy that can come in and, start learning right away and start contributing to that rookie class right away. But draft stock is falling because he's expected to be sidelined for the 2022 season with a spinal fusion surgery. That's a really concerning injury. You're dealing with a lot of really tricky, important parts there. You're dealing with the part of your body that supports everything else. So while he could be kind of an insurance or a value pick here for a couple of NFL teams, when a player who maybe would have gone in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round may see him go more so in like the 5th or 6th just because of that injury. When you're picking a guy in the 1st, 2nd, or even 3rd round, you're kind of expecting and hoping them to contribute in their first year, and if not their first year, in their second. I think Damon Clark has a long recovery ahead of him, and that may be a fear of some NFL general managers and head coaches. So really kind of a shame that injury gets in the way of things like that. But I think Damon Clark is able to, find a landing space, and after he recovers, after that 2022 season on the sidelines, he'll be able to come in and contribute right away. But coming up next, a lot of talk about LSU players in the NFL. There are plenty of LSU players who made their season debuts in the MLB yesterday, breaking down what MLB LSU looks like and also previewing LSU baseball for the weekend. We'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, BetOnline is your #1 source for all of your betting needs and information. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. Tiger finished 1 under par yesterday. Honestly, kind of blew me away. I didn't think Tiger was going to be able to play, much less play at the level that he's playing at. So he has, I believe, 40-1 odds to win the Masters. So maybe worth sprinkling a little bit of money here and there. But BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So coming up on next week's podcast, on Monday, we'll do a recap of LSU baseball's weekend series against Mississippi State, as well as anything that we missed over the weekend, any NFL draft updates, whether that be from Derek Stingley or another LSU player from that class. We'll have all of those updates on Monday. But MLB opening day was yesterday, and there were 8 former LSU players out there. Now, what exactly does that mean for this LSU class now? I look at DJ LeMahieu, I look at Alex Bregman, I look at Austin Nola, Aaron Nola, Jake Fraley, Kevin Gosman, Will Harris, Alex Lang, all former Tigers who were out there, on a professional diamond. And it's not just that. It's also the fact that LSU players aren't just in the league, they're kind of dominating the league. Yesterday, before opening day kicked off, I made my picks for each division leader. And there are, my picks, exactly what does that really mean? But also I looked at, for example, my winner in the NL East was the Phillies. And Aaron Nola was a reason why I thought that Philadelphia absolutely could win the division this year. And of course I look at Nick Castellanos, I look at some of the sluggers that they brought in Philly may have one of the best offenses in the league. It's going to be a home run machine, but I also look at Aaron Nola and the fact that he supports and elevates a lot of Philly's bullpen. I think that's a big reason why, Aaron Nola is a big reason why I think the Phillies can find a ton of success. My AL West leader, and it wasn't even close, it wasn't even a hesitation for me, was the Houston Astros. And I look at Alex Bregman on that team, a player that's able to contribute both offensively and defensively. And of course, they're going to be missing pieces of this Houston Astros team. Excuse me. But with Alex Bregman, in addition to so many of their other offensive pieces in Kyle Tucker and Jordan Alvarez, Alex Bregman is a huge part of this offense. They're one of the best slugging teams in the league. So many of these teams, and I also look at Kevin Gausman, for example, who was just signed by the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm picking the Blue Jays to win that division as well. I'm picking them to win the AL East because of the additions that they made to their bullpen in Kevin Gausman and, of course, Vlad Guerrero and Bo Bichette, and two players that have been outstanding offensively. And I didn't even notice when I was doing this, but I looked back at my division picks and I realized that LSU players were so many reasons why I thought those teams were going to be elevated. And it wasn't like a homer pick, but it's like, you look at Alex Bregman, DJ LeMahieu, Aaron Nola, Kevin Gausman. There's some of their names in the league that everyone knows. They're certified all-stars in this league. So I think that's really cool to be able to see, with all this talk about LSU players in the NFL, about how LSU players play on Sunday. LSU players also play on weekend series in the MLB as well. So I think that's pretty cool, and I kind of see the difference in LSU baseball right now. And I do wonder if, seeing all of these MLB players who came from the exact same roots that these players are coming from now, I wonder if seeing that yesterday on opening day puts a little, kick in this team's butt to be able to look at the same guys who wore those same colors, who went to the same locker room, who played in the same stadium, that are now playing on the biggest stage in baseball. If they say that's where we want to go, that's what we want to be, and that is the standard of this team. And I do wonder if that gives them a little bit of a kick in the butt this weekend against Mississippi State, because it will not be easy. Of course, the reigning College World Series champions. This team has taken a step back from 2021. Mississippi State, been pretty above average in the SEC so far. I don't think they have really emerged as one of the better teams in the SEC, but I do think that this is a really solid opponent, and LSU needs this boost badly after dropping that series to Auburn. Auburn was ranked for the first time this season after winning that series against LSU. So that's not a good sign. And that's definitely, I'm sure, probably wearing on this team that it's just incredibly tough for them to make simple plays defensively. So I do hope that, maybe seeing so many LSU Tigers on the biggest stage in baseball can give them a little bit of a kick that they need and get and win this series against Mississippi State this weekend. But all the updates about that series on Monday, my thoughts, my takeaways, and any other updates from the NFL draft as well on Monday. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts.